school. So in the last class, we started looking at what the product backlog is. We had good discussions of what the product backlog is, what is composed of the product backlog, like the epic and the user stories. All of them are user stories, but when they are big and they can span over multiple sprints or even multiple teams, then that is called an epic. So when it can fit only in one sprint, then we call it a user story. And we said user story should meet the inverse criteria. Then we went on to describe the user story and its format, where we try to reduce the bias of the developer when building a story. So that is what we discussed last time. Then we looked at the life cycle. We looked at an example of a user story and the kind of thought that goes into a user story. Then we also looked at ways of creating or the life cycle of a user story from creation to review. Then we looked at ways of splitting a user story, like creating spikes, splitting it in parts, interfaces, etc. Who creates the user story? We said anyone can create the user story, but the PO must be notified for him to prioritize the feedback. So we're to look at how user stories or work items that are in the backlog are refined. That is what we want to look at today. Are there any questions from the previous lessons? Yes, Tatiana, you were asking something.
No, I didn't ask a question.
Any questions or challenges from the last lesson? If not, then we can start talking about product backlog, refinement, or grooming. Now, when we talk of refinement, what do we actually mean? It's just adding some detail, just adding more details, more clarity, more information that will make the developer understand what the product backlog item is all about. That is the whole idea of refinement. That's the whole idea of refinement. So when there is no clarity on what has to be built or had to be, how the developers will go about creating the feature, then it means there is doubt. And when there is doubt and they go ahead to build the feature without clarity, that's garbage. And once there's garbage in, probably there will be garbage out. So the reason refinement happens is to provide that detail on the product backlog item. So normally, we constantly refine based on the changes that are happening in the market out there. When there are changes in requirements, when there are changes in the needs of the users, so too there is an adaptation. The team also adapts, the product also adapts to these changes. And why is refinement very important? Because requirements are constantly changing. We are in an agile space. We are in a very complex environment, in a tech space where there are constant changes. So these changes, the team will also have to reflect the changes in the user stories. Maybe a user story was created with a particular need based on the time. Then as time goes on, it changes. And with these changes, then they will also have to refine that story as well. So Changes in business requirements, in market conditions, in technology will also cause changes in the product backlog item. That is why refinement is very necessary. So it's just adding detail. And what is the process of refinement? It starts with introducing the work item. Let's say the work item is registration. Then the next thing is for developers to collaborate. Collaboration simply means when the item is presented either by the PO or by the Scrum Master, and then providing some details, what the stakeholders need, it is now for the developers to collaborate. That is, ask questions to the stakeholders to see if they understand or if there is clarity in what they are thinking. That is the process of collaboration, having that exchange. When that exchange is clear and there is need for modification, then they modify. When there's modification, they confirm. When there's a confirmation, yes, we understand everything is okay, this is how it's supposed to be, then they can estimate how much time, how much effort they will need in order to complete the work. And that is what we shall as well cover today. So think of refinement as well, like you are going for your grocery shopping and you say, we want to buy bread. Now you need to think. You ask questions to your man or your woman or your kids. What kind of bread do you want? Do you still like that kind of bread you usually like to eat? Yeah. You just want to be sure if things haven't changed. And then you go ahead to get it. If you just go and buy the bread he usually eats, not finding out if there's change in taste or change in the kind of bread they want, then it's a waste. That's garbage that is in. So that's why refinement is always very, very important. So once the product owner presents it, he opens the floor for comments and questions. Then these work items are refined one after another. They don't do bulk refinement. No, they will just go one item after another because the requirements per item are not the same. So now, let's talk about story execution. Who executes the stories is the developers. Who does the refinement? It is the developers, because the refinement here now is the modification they need to do or clarifications they need to get. When they get it now, they go into the execution mode, which is actually writing the code. So the Scrum team reviews and add the inputs to the stories. That's part of modification and execution. So they refine every story iteratively until it meets the definition of done, which means they need to get every little detail that will entail the work item to be completed. Then they need to estimate the relative effort. We will talk about estimating relative effort later. And then they can confirm. So this just gives another way of executing or just further explaining how the refinement procedure happens. So what happens during the refinement? Again, the items are reviewed and revised. If we want to work on the registration feature, do the developers understand the needs of the stakeholder or end users when it comes to login, when it comes to logout, when it comes to changing the password? Who decides how the refinement can be done is the team. It is not the stakeholders. It's not anybody. The team decides when and how the refinement will be done. Is refinement a one-off or one-time process thing? No, it is an ongoing process. It is an ongoing process. The refinement should happen every sprint, and the Scrum Guide stipulates that the team should dedicate 10% of its capacity towards refinement. So if the capacity of the team is 100%, they should dedicate at least 10% to that, to do refinement. Why do you think they should constantly refine? So why do you think the team needs to constantly refine at least once every sprint?
They are constantly refined because they want to do the thing good. Um, and to avoid to do things that they will do again to avoid repetition or
Yeah, it's not avoiding repetition, but I mentioned it.
Um, so refinement happens or has to happen due to an ever-changing environment of technology and the and also the stakeholders and the final users. So we have to refine the backlog to basically stay up to date in terms of the end user, in terms of requirements from the end user, from the
Yeah,
stakeholders, and also mm, from the PO.
right, right. That's it. So the refinement meeting is an ongoing process, and this has to happen because of the constant changes in the requirements. So that is why they need to always keep the backlog up to date, at least amount of work that can fit into at least 2 sprints. That is why the refinement needs to constantly happen. So, like I've already mentioned, that refinement usually consumes not more than 10% of the capacity of the team. So the product backlog items can be updated at any time by the product owner by his own decision and discretion. He can add user stories in the backlog at his own discretion at any time. But where he cannot just add user stories, where can the PO not just add user stories during the sprint without negotiating with the developers?
Sorry, come again. What's the question?
In which backlog can the PO not have the right just to put in user stories?
When the user stories have been, I don't know what to use, but have been broken down and given to the developers to carry out at that point, like
And
when
when
the developers.
and in Scrum, how do we when how do we call that?
We the PO, even though he manages the backlog, cannot come up with new user stories when it endangers the Spring's goal, when it's endangered the Spring's goal, or when it affects the quality of the sprint goal, or probably it causes the sprint to creep, the
Yeah,
scope of the sprint to creep.
yeah. And that is a correct answer, but there's a particular word I'm asking. In which backlog can he not just add stories? There are two kinds of backlogs. We have the product backlog and a backlog that is created during the sprint. How do they call that one they create during the sprint? The sprint backlog.
The sprint backlog,
Who controls the sprint backlog?
the developers.
Yeah, that's why the PO cannot just drop any word, any stuff there without negotiating with the developers to understand if it fits with their capacity or if it fits within their buffers or their buffer stories they can take. So now we are talking about before refinement happens, the PO needs to prioritize the backlog. He needs to prioritize the backlog. And you know what prioritizing the backlog means. So items that are of lower priority, they go to the bottom. items of higher priorities, they go to the top. I think we have demonstrated that it's several times. So this is how a product backlog is ranked. So the product work of the work that is in a product backlog should be enough to occupy the developers for at least the upcoming sprint or two. So product backlog items that can be done by the development team within one stream team are deemed ready. That is now one other thing you hear, definition of ready. When do we call user stories ready? These are stories that have already been refined and there is clarity and they are estimated. Then they are just there on your mark set, ready to go into the sprint. But any story that has not been refined and has not been estimated, it is not yet tagged ready. So when we use Jira, you can create various swim lanes or various columns in areas, swim lanes in your backlog, just to differentiate things. Stories that are ready are marked with the ready tag. Stories that are not yet ready, they are not tagged with anything, or they are tagged with not ready tag. And just to make things look clear. So the definition of ready, as in ready, means this work item in a Scrum team has already been refined, has already been estimated, and the developers know what they have to do there. So it's just ready to go into the sprint. So it's very, very important. When an item is refined, estimated, it gains a certain level of transparency. It's very transparent because everybody in the team has a shared understanding. So now, how does work items get to the backlog before it is prioritized? The developers, the stakeholders, they raise the demand. Then bring it to the team through the PO for clarification. And when they get the clarification, they can have a clue of what the complexity is, the difficulty level, the challenges involved that will be involved in delivering this work item. Yes, Moise. Your hand is up.
Yeah. At what level of the sprint is the refinement done? Is it at the level of the sprint planning, or because given your statement from the word ready, which means it has to have been refined and everything okay for it to be sent into a sprint. So at what stage is this refinement done?
During the sprint. Let's say we start a sprint today, right? And we have a 2-week sprint. Which means if we start a sprint today, it is okay for us to have a refinement on a day like Monday or Tuesday next week. So a refinement should happen during every sprint in preparation for what? For the next sprint planning. You get the point?
No. Is it like the refinement for the next sprint should be done at the current sprint?
Yes, during the current sprint.
Okay.
And it's always like that. Why? Because we need to constantly keep being ready for the next sprint. It's the same like you cook food for guests and you know that the next guests are coming in the next 3 hours or 5 hours. You maybe start the preparation like yesterday because they will not come and sit before you start to cook. So it's just refinement, you must understand it is not a Scrum event. Let's put that out there. Refinement is not considered as a Scrum event. Why? Because this refinement and estimation can still be done in the sprint planning. That is why the creators of Scrum gave a duration of 8 hours for a 1-month sprint. So it is assumed that they will take 1 day and refine and estimate the work they will be doing for the whole sprint. But refinement is just a product backlog management event, just to make the work of the PO and the team easy. And because of refinement, it reduces the length of sprint planning. Just give me a second, please. Now, I was saying that the refinement, don't mix it up to be a Scrum event. No, it is a product backlog management event, just to make the work of the team, the work of the people lighter and easier. And it gives room for the team to prepare for the next sprint. That is why the creators of Scrum do not consider this as a Scrum event, because that can still, all those can still be done in the sprint planning. Am I making sense? We getting it?
I'm just thinking, isn't this going to interfere in the work of the developers, because they have to be thinking of the refinement of the next sprint and while working on the current sprint, and so
it will interfere, but it is necessary. That is why it is okay, and Scrum has stipulated that they can take 10% of their capacity and dedicate it to refining work items for the next sprint. And 10% of 2 weeks is like 3 hours every sprint, which is okay. That 3 hours is not counted as they were doing the work of the sprint. Do you get the explanation now?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, they need to take out time from their busy work to prepare for the next sprint. If not, they will waste more time when they are doing sprint planning. Rather, they can dedicate 3 hours of their working time in 2 weeks to refine, which is okay.
And because the environment is that agile, what if a sprint that has been refined in this sprint expected, by the time they get to the next sprint, the requirements or the needs of the users, the stakeholders has changed?
Yeah, when the needs have changed, then we adapt to the needs immediately before we start the next sprint. We do that all the time. We refine knowing that there can be changes. And if there are changes, we are agile. We are flexible to incorporate the change at any stage of production or any stage of this development of software.
Okay.
There are many times we refine stories and then 1 week later, we don't even need to work on them because the demand is no longer obsolete. Or there are some changes that we need to add, and then we'll add in a fly before we push it into the sprint. It's just practical. So that's the whole idea of refinement. And now here are some interview questions which you can go through. Now, here talking about definition of ready, as I mentioned, ready. This is something that has gained some level of prominence in the Scrum environment now. Why is it that the definition of ready is important? It's important because those stories that are already refined and ready to go into the sprint, they are tagged with ready. because it is ready, because developers have refined, they already understand what they have to do, they have estimated the effort and so on. So they would deem these stories as ready for selection during the sprint planning. These are stories that are already estimated. We will talk about estimation a little shortly. So the PO can select the work items. It's okay, which are relating to the value and the needs of the stakeholders. But he's always in conversation with the developers to make trade-offs, to determine, because they determine the final estimate, because they are the ones performing the work. So it's the same like you take your car to the garage and then you are telling the mechanic what to do when you are not the mechanic. So that is why developers, the PO may influence, but the developers have control over what they can take, what they can't take, what is technically feasible, what is not technically feasible to be delivered. So it's very important. So that's the whole idea of definition of ready. Definition of ready items that are tagged ready are items whose clarity is known. The team understands the amount of effort that is needed to deliver on this, which is estimation. And then they have that level of clarity to be able to say, yes, this item is ready for the next sprint, and we can pick it up. As simple as that. And the team can set a criteria for what ready means for them. So as a Scrum Master, you just need to guide the team to understand within your product, is it feasible to have a definition of ready? What does ready mean? When we say items are ready, what is the criteria? So basically, that's the whole idea of definition of ready in terms of work items or user stories. Now we want to talk about estimation. We have refined the story. And what's the refinement process? The PO announcing or reading out the story, explaining the acceptance criteria, like we mentioned last time. Acceptance criteria understood, and then developers say, yeah, we are good to go. Let's tag it ready. Now that it's ready, let's say, yeah, we've understood. Now the next thing is for us to estimate. What is estimation? When we say we are estimating, what does it mean? In your opinion, just unmute, put up your hand and blow.
To my understanding, when we talk of estimating, is to see how long, in terms of time, in duration of days, weeks, months, how long the work they have taken is going to take. In terms of personnel, how many persons will be needed to cover this task? How many hours from each person will be required to cover this task? And probably also give a buffer should, in case all of these estimations, there is a short or say we have estimated 5 persons and all of a sudden the person is sick, then the sprint should not go out of its defined scope or out of its defined duration. So it falls into that buffer area. All of that to me tends to fall under estimation.
Yeah, that's just that's part of it. That's part of it. So basically, estimation in Scrum is basically just thinking, it's determined by various factors. They don't estimate in terms of time, but they estimate in terms of effort. So they look at the work item, they look at how much effort that goes into it. Now, with estimation, what now is effort? Effort is determined by various factors. What is the complexity level of the work item? How complex is this work item in terms of difficulty level? Is it relatively easy? Is it relatively hard? Then they look at what are the dependencies involved? What are the impediments I will get in the course of working on this item? Then they will now give an estimate and say, yeah, mostly the most popular one is using story points. And story points have a meaning. But I want you to understand what drives estimation. Estimation is driven by a number of variables. Complexity level, that's level of difficulty of the work item. Skill level of the developer as well. The impediments they will face, and so on. So why is estimation very, very important? It helps in forecasting how much to bring into a sprint. So why the team should estimate is to know basically how much work they can take on during a sprint. A team that doesn't estimate won't be able to know how much work they can bring into a sprint, or that will determine the amount of work they are able to complete. Who does the estimation? Who do you think should estimate? Who do you think should be involved in estimating user stories?
The developers, of course.
Why do you think the developers, of course?
I mean, in terms of estimation, they are the one doing the work, so that they know how much they can do, and they know if they need help, and just basically that's it.
Yeah, that's it. So the whole objective is basically know how much work the entire team can do during the sprint, and also would consider the user stories for the sprint by priority and ability of the team to deliver them, and the PO, to enable that the team is able to pick up work, has to prioritize. So these are things we have already mentioned. But now let's dive deep into the whole idea of estimation. All this here is literature, but we've already summarized it in few sentences for you to understand what estimation means. So the team developers that are responsible for delivering the work items of the team are the ones that will be involved in estimation. And these work items, user stories, are estimated using user story points. Story points. What are story points? These are just simple numbers that are assigned to story points that determine how much effort will go into completing them. We'll explain those story points later. There are various ways of estimating, not only using story points, but it's just that story points is more popular and it's more convenient than others. So what is estimation? Like I mentioned, it's estimating just the amount of effort. And for effort to be estimated, they look at story points, and they have to look at the data. For example, in the last sprint, how many story points did we forecast to finish, and how many did we actually finish? So it's very important to understand the whole idea of story point. So why is estimation very, very important besides forecasting? It is also helping the team in one way or the other, removing bias, right? You get to understand my own perspective, your perspective, in terms of working that particular item. It encourages transparency. It also sparks a discussion within the team. And with all of this involved, it helps the team to produce or provide reliable estimates. estimations that are reliable. Remember, we are using the word estimation. An estimation is always like a calculated guess or an educated guess. But the reality is always discovered in the process of work. An estimation can be very apt or very right when the developer already has some experience working on that particular story or work item regularly. Then they already have that skill level and they can say it's low effort because I've already done it over and over and over. But a new developer who hasn't worked on that story or that work item, it will be more complex because he needs to learn. So that's very, very important. Now, what are some of the estimation techniques? There are various estimation techniques like numeric sizing. The team can estimate a user story, for example, say registration, if they are using numeric sizes, which I've never seen any team use, by just saying, when they listen to the story explanation by the product owner and so on, they can quickly, if they are using the numeric sizes, they can say, this story sounds like a 5. What does 5 mean on a number scale of 1 to 10? What will 5 mean for you? That the complexity level, or I will rate it 5. Yeah.
Average.
Average.
Not too difficult, not too simple.
Yeah. When it starts to go up to the neighborhood of 7, 8, 9, the complexity level is really high. When it's going down towards 0 or towards 1, it is low. That's just sizing it up, roughly. Then you have another method using t-shirt sizes. Like,
but isn't the sizing relative, like you mentioned?
It's relative estimation. We are coming to that to explain.
If there are 4 developers, a developer can size something 7, a developer can size it 2. So how now do they get to a middle ground?
We shall do that in practical terms. And I will show you in this situation, what do you do as a Scrum Master when there is no compromise or when everybody is saying their own thing. So, but let's first of all understand the techniques. We've understood numeric sizing. Then we have t-shirt sizes. We know just basically using the t-shirt sizes of our t-shirt from S, XS, etc. That tells you triple XL is a really big story, and so on. Now, the bigger the more the number of X's and L's, the higher the complexity. That's what it means. But what has been frequently used and is still being used, and what you will see, is the Fibonacci sequence. They are using the Fibonacci sequence. This sequence was created by this Italian mathematician, and he came up with this sequence. You can go and look up, check that out. 1 to complexity levels. This was not in relation to Scrum, though. It was just his mathematical theory. But people have borrowed it and they are using it in the Scrum environment to guide their estimation. And you see that the lower the complexity, the lower the number. For example, if a user story's complexity is 1, it means that relative to 2, 1 is easier to complete than the story 2. And as we move northwards, this direction, complexity level increases. So the higher the value, the value of the sequence, the higher the complexity level. Now let's dive deep a little into the Fibonacci sequence. Now, to do this, developers, they use what we call the planning poker technique. They play a game. And it's a game we will play here, roughly. I don't want to introduce a tool now, but I will introduce the tool when we are doing the practical session. Now, let's take an example of, we are not here planning poker, but know that when they are planning poker, You can Google the poker game, right? It's just a number, it's just cards with these numbers assigned to it. You must not use the cards. You must not, there's a digital tool for it. But I want you to understand the logic here. The logic here is, let's look at this, let's estimate in very simple terms using this Fibonacci sequence. And if you had the understanding already that the higher the number, the higher the complexity. Now, let's see how we'll do it practically now. So, let's take an example of a user story. Now, let's do this. Remember, this is relative estimation. We look at a number relative, we make an estimation relative to another. Is relative. Something can be relative when it's only alone. It's only relative with two. So now let's take this scenario. How will you estimate the amount of effort that goes into frying an egg and making a cup of tea? Use these numbers. Use these numbers to assign in terms of complexity based on your knowledge. Remember, estimation is guided by what? Level of complexity. Knowledge level, level of understanding, experience, etc. So let's do that exercise. Let's estimate relatively between frying an egg and making a cup of tea. Which one do you think is more complex? Will you estimate to say it will require more effort? Sorry?
C1.
Hmm?
C1.
Okay, you give T 1 and then fry an egg
3.
3. Who else?
Fry an egg 2.
Yes.
Fry an egg 2.
Yeah.
I will say the tea is 1 and egg is 2.
Okay, now let's stop there. We have two different opinions. Now, this is what happens in the Scrum team. As a Scrum Master, when you have this scenario, it means that for the person that mentioned 3, you need to find out, why do you think it's a little more complex? And you added 3. Instead of 2, for you, it's 3. Why? So you have to help this person to explain. Maybe the way he sees it, the others are seeing it too simple and do not see another aspect which he doesn't see. So
can I give an example for the egg?
Yeah.
So like why you say 3, okay, let me say I say 3 because for an egg, you first have to crack it.
Yeah.
Then you have to mix it. Then you have to add ingredients, salt, something. You also have to add oil and turn on your gas, wait for it to get hot, then pour your eggs and fry. But making a tea, all you're doing is boiling, getting your hot water and, putting in your tea and making it.
Can I say something, please?
Yeah.
So
now we are estimating and refining.
Yeah.
Correct.
Can I say something?
Keep it going.
Okay. Like Brian Manuel just said, 3. Now let's take for a scenario where maybe we are working in an environment where we have our brothers, the Western people, the whites. We know the way they fry their egg. They crack, they fry. Maybe they just add a bit of white pepper and black pepper rather, because I used to eat black pepper and they fry. Now they will go for the 2. They'll take a cup of tea 1 and egg 2. Why us that we know that we have to put tomatoes, we have to put onion, You have to put pepper and so on and so forth. We might go for the 3. So this is where now we have to explain. If they have to ask, why did you choose 3? This is where we have to explain that, okay, I choose 3 because this, to fry the egg, this is what we have to do, we have to do. And for, I don't know.
Yeah. So now, what are we faced with? We are faced with 2 different ways of frying eggs. And we don't be surprised that we may have another person in the call say 8. Why? Maybe this person has never fried an egg in his life. Has no experience. So now, in this case, as a Scrum Master, you've explained their own angle. Another person will say, but what kind of method is that to fry an egg? You mix things. No. For me, what I know is, right, crack the egg on the pan, immediately it goes in. They don't even drop salt, they just do pepper. Crack, crack, crack.
Yeah. You know the thing.
They just want crack, 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 it's ready. And another person will say, we just crack food like that, we don't even turn it. We still take with the yolk, but us, we will turn, we don't want the yolk. Some will say, no, it's a little complex, we do scrambled eggs. You know, not everybody can make scrambled eggs, right? And it really comes out well. But what's the point here? The point here is, in relative terms, it is easier to quickly make a cup of tea than fry an egg. Do we all agree on that? Yes. That is why it got 1. So each time when you are running, doing an estimation session with your team, you always, as a Scrum Master, watch out where there are differences. Now, I would explain my own style. Solange should explain her own style, and Emeka. Now, listening to each other, we can come to an agreement. I can say, no, I agree with the 2. It's okay. It's more easier than my style, which is okay. So this is estimation. We have just done an estimation session. So this is basically how I always teach my team how to estimate, with very simple examples like this. What is the point here? To understand the idea of relativity, of relative estimation. This means, in relative terms, comparing to how to make an egg and making a cup of tea, it is much easier making a cup of tea. So that is how they look at user stories, and they will see, oh, it's much easier creating a login button or feature than creating a password. So because it's more complex creating a password, let's give it a 3. It is easier a little bit compared to this to create login button. Let's give it a 2. Then they will agree. So what happens is, you throw the story, everybody, when they have clarity, now everybody now, based on their own individual knowledge, will give their own number. And then we play that game and see if we have a consensus. So these numbers here, each of them represent a story point. So if I say 1, it means story point 1. If I say 2, it means 2 story points. 3 story points. 5 story points. That means then we now as a team can decide, what does 1 mean? It means lower complexity, very minimal effort. And as the numbers increase, it means the amount of effort as well increases. Are we clear? Are we getting it? Who is not getting it?
Yeah.
Who is not getting it? want to be sure if everybody's getting it.
I think you should go and change and come down. You should brush.
Okay. Then I think silence means everything is okay. So like I mentioned, every number of this Fibonacci sequence rates the relative effort of work. So the main idea is just to help the team to make tough decisions around the difficulty of work. Because it's when they start to discuss and you see reasons why this one thinks this is higher, this one is lower. When they start to discuss, then you can actually understand the differences then. And then you will see how they are estimating. So why is it important not to estimate using hours, but story time? Yeah.
Sorry, before we move on, so I want to ask if, as a Scrum Master or just generally, is it possible to set like a point base for the estimation? So let's say we all know that 1 and 2 are the easiest part. So maybe the beginning of the sprint or beginning of the backlog, we've done the home page, and that was a 2. And as you're moving on, it's getting more difficult. So can you put a baseline for the difficulty level of the user story?
No, it's difficult because each user story has its requirement. But if there are some user stories that are already having a standard, when they come up, for example, like bugs, we don't estimate bugs, or we just give a uniform number. In one of my teams, we just say every bug is estimated at 2, complexity level 2. So the team now decides, what does 1 mean? They will now define a rubric. What does 1 story point mean in terms of hours and so on? They are now doing that gymnastics, but they need to, first of all, always estimate in story points. So I have never encouraged the team to have a baseline, because team members can change. And when we have a baseline, a new team member comes in with different experience or without having experience in the work we are doing in the team, you will not expect that team member to follow that because he's not yet experienced at that level. So we leave it open and we don't establish a baseline. I hope it's clear.
Yes, thank you.
So why is it not a best practice to estimate using hours instead of story points? This is very important for you to understand, because most teams that don't understand estimation tend to estimate things in terms of hours. So why? Because hours, they are so subjective. If we say as a team we are estimating using hours, me that has been in a team for 3 years, already having the experience of that code base and knowing how it goes around in the team, been working on those tasks repeatedly, I've already mastered and I'm good. So if we say every user story takes 5 hours to finish, me with experience, I can knock it off in 2. A new person, you also expect that new person to finish in 5, which is not yet experienced. You will need maybe 10 because he needs to understand the code base. That is not the best way. That is why it is okay to always just use a number. And this number means the same to everybody, rather than using hours. It's not the best practice. So what's the difference between estimation and tracking? The difference between estimation and tracking is that estimation is just measuring the size of a work item. That's the product backlog item. or an individual piece of work based on how we have explained. But tracking is simply using those estimates to ensure that work is on track. For example, if we say as a team that we are carrying into the sprint 10 story points, by mid-sprint, the expectation is we must have finished 5 story points. Now that is tracking. We are using those story points to track our progress towards our sprint goal. And you need those story points to be able to track where we are, what we are doing, how much work is left to be completed. Do we get the difference between tracking and estimation? Who is confused with this terminology?
Can you please come again?
So estimation is simply measuring the size in terms of effort, the size of a work item relative to each other, determined by the effort that will be put into complete. But tracking work items is simply referring to using those estimates to ensure that work is on track, or using those estimates to determine how much work is left to be completed from the amount of work estimated. An example, if we estimate that in a 2-week sprint, we can complete 20 story points. On the 5th day, we will check how many story points have we completed, because we have 10 working days. On the 5th working day, we check how many user stories have we completed. So for us to track, we'll now say we have completed 7 and 3 more to go, for example. That now is tracking. Tracking is linked to team performance.
But these story points don't have the same weight or the same level of complexity. Probably. And say in a 2 weeks period and of 10 days, you are halfway and have completed 7 points. And probably these 3 points that are remaining could even be more heavier. One of those points could be heavier than those 7 points you have completed. So I don't think it's an evidence that you are midway or over midway with respect to 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
So how do you mitigate that or manage that?
That is the reality. That is why we call that just estimation. Estimations doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. We are just giving a number in order to have a sense of how much work we are taking into the sprint. So it is also common practice that the team can say, now, based on our understanding, we believe this story is 3. Then while they are working on the story, they discover, it's not as small as we thought. It is bigger than 3. That is now reality, no longer just estimate. We are just estimating. It's a rough estimation, relative estimation. So in that situation, where we discover that we said 3, and the cost of the sprint is more than 3, that now, if we say we are going by that, we are wrong. But estimations are never held tight because they are estimates. We are just estimating based on our understanding now. So maybe as they dig deeper, as they are developing into the story, they will discover some more complexity. Maybe they will need another input from somewhere. They will need another meeting to have discussions, and that will increase the effort. So estimations are estimations. They are not specifics. And when you discover that your team constantly do not always have the estimations as near right as possible, let's say they constantly underestimate that it's a 1 story. But yet you see that a 1 story pointer still stays till the end of the sprint. and maybe it's not even completed. Now you observe those patterns and you can understand they are struggling with estimation. How do you help them? Is by reorganizing an estimation session. I always do that. I will just do this basic one I did with you, and everybody understands the concept. Now they can apply into their work. Everybody clear? Any questions? I guess the Scrum is scrumming now. If not, we can look at the sprint backlog. So we did the product backlog and its composition and the activities that go on in the product backlog. Now the sprint backlog, it is as simple as it gets, which you already know. The sprint backlog is simply created during sprint planning. The sprint backlog cannot be created during refinement. It is only created during the sprint the sprint planning. Why? Because this is a backlog where work items are selected from the backlog and pushed into the sprint. Let me demonstrate on Jira so that you can understand easily. So this is what happens. Backlog items are refined already, they are understood, they are estimated, and they are ready to go into the sprint. So what happens is they simply drag and drop them. This is the sprint backlog area, and we want to work on this story. 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to work on these stories which are already refined and estimated. So now I was talking about estimation, let me just come back there. This is where to put the estimate in Jira. This number shows the estimate. So let's say we discussed, convert, and everything was okay. We estimated and everybody agreed that this is a 3-story point. This story can fit into 3 story points. Then you come here and put 3. So this number means an estimate of 3 story points. And relative to velocity, it is much easier to complete the velocity task than registration. That is why it is 2. So we will be working on these stories, which are already refined and estimated during the sprint. Now, what we do is the PO or you, if you are manning the board, you just drag like this, drop. Yeah, it was just so. Now, this now is the sprint backlog. These stories that remain in the backlog, this is not our focus for the sprint. Even though they are estimated, it's okay. They will go into the next sprint. But we have looked at our capacity and everything. We see that we cannot take all these stories, but just these 4. Now they are in the sprint. Now, what is the total amount of work we have taken into the sprint? It is 3, 10, 0, 13 story points. Looking at this number, this is the effort the team has forecasted they will be able to deliver during the sprint. Now, during the sprint, now we can be tracking how many days are left for the sprint to end. How much work have we completed here in terms of points?
How did we arrive at that 3, 10, 0?
Is a summation of all of this. 3 plus 2, 5. 5 plus 3, 8. 8 plus 5. 13.
13. So initially you said there was no time frame given to the amount of work, but you just talked about time now.
No, time is we have our sprint duration.
Okay.
Is the duration of our sprint, which is 2 weeks, for example. So Jira simply just makes work easy for you to know. You see, if I hover here, you see done. Done is in green. In progress is in blue. Then gray here is 3 items are still in the to-do column. We divide the board into columns. And so you can already see this is the forecast, 13 story point, segmented into the various three layers. As easy as that. So
why is
yeah
always blocked? Always on. Why is it blocked?
It's just a status. It's just a status on the board, just to create transparency. That's why I'm always I don't want to show the board when I'm explaining the theory, because it starts to take people away. Because once people see Jira, they just get you are hooked into it. Now we have our sprint planning. Why do we have a sprint planning? Sorry, our sprint backlog. Why do we create a sprint backlog? Just to create focus. And when we create a sprint backlog, we create a sprint goal. Now, when we want to create a sprint goal, we start the sprint on Jira. So, start the sprint. Just wait, it's coming. Okay. He kicked me out. Sorry, Zoom kicked me out. So we want to start the sprint now, right? We want to start the sprint. Now you see it gives us the duration of the sprint, 2 weeks. We can set the duration, 2 weeks, start date, then end date automatically. Now we set the sprint goal. Why do we set the sprint goal? We set the sprint goal to give to have focus, to have direction, because this is what we want to achieve. Let's say the sprint goal is complete the registration feature of the site, like that. And then we start. When we click start, it takes us now to the board with our various statuses. Now, in the practical session, I will now have to teach you when and how you have to initiate a discussion with the team to create their workflow. And these are things you don't see in the Scrum Guide or anywhere. This is now Scrum mastering at its best, you guiding your team. If you join a team that has not worked in Scrum before and you are their first Scrum master, to set up things, how to create this. There are a lot of discussions that go into creating this workflow, which is not what we are talking about today. So the whole idea is for you to understand basically why we create the backlog, the whole idea around surrounding the sprint backlog, the sprint goal, and so on, which we have already completed. And we see that the sprint goal is the commitment to the sprint backlog. And it gives the team the focus. It gives them direction and encouraging the team to work together towards a common goal. It is not okay when a team is not working with the sprint goal. If you join that team and you discover they don't work with the sprint goal, you as a Scrum Master, you have to coach the team to think of using a sprint goal. So it's very, very important. And that's it. So I suggest we start talking about increment in the next class. So 2 more classes we have done. Is there any question? Is it getting more complex?
A little bit.
No. Yeah, that's why I'm taking this one gradually. It's not complex per se, but it's just a little bit, it needs just a little bit of steadiness to understand. But it's very simple.
I want to say something. So it's just the idea of, okay, I'm in a Scrum planning meeting, right? Like, you have to know what those
Sprint
developers are
planning
saying.
meeting, not Scrum planning meeting.
Sorry, sprint planning meeting. Mistake.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, like, understanding what those developers are saying, isn't it important for the Scrum Master? Because, like, you would use some of their words, you would have to say, understand the softwares they use. I'm just asking generally.
It's not your job. You are not a developer. I am not a developer. I don't need to understand everything they say. But my job is on the Scrum framework. I hear how they discuss, and I can know when they are going into excesses. The reason the creators of Scrum did not want the role of the Scrum Master to be technical is because you, the Scrum Master, can get lost in those discussions and you will not do your Scrum Mastery. You will not facilitate. You will not see those anti-patterns. You will not be able to keep to time. So it is an advantage for me being in that discussion that is like a complete non-technical guy to say, hey, we have to keep to time. Okay, let's give room for everybody to speak. This is now managing, taking care of the individuals and their interactions.
Yeah.
It's just that employers, they set unnecessary expectations for the job role of the Scrum Master. You should know this, know that, know that. It's just become unnecessarily competitive because the landscape of Scrum Mastery is dominated a little bit by people who were writing code before and then they moved into Agile and then just liked it and picked up the jobs. So they most at times will understand the discussions. But the job of a Scrum Master is not to be technical. The job of the Scrum Master is facilitation, coaching, mentoring. So it's not a requirement for you to know the code. If you know it, it is just like a spice to make you look good in front of companies. Did that answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. The team I took over, there was a Scrum Master there who was also a technical guy. When I was preparing to take over from him, I needed to shadow him for 1 month. And I saw a total mess because he was even more technical than some of the developers. And all his meetings would never finish on time. The facilitation was zero. And he himself knew that he is not he's a better developer than Scrum Master. And the developers, they need that control. Yeah, not being a developer makes a Scrum Master unbiased because I'm not biased to say, someone knows better than this man. Oh, the point is okay, let's go with the point. No, I'm listening to everybody, guiding that we should make a decision that is favorable at least to the product and not to individuals.
No, Denmark didn't score.
You know, so that's important.
Yes.
So just take some time and you understand what I'm explaining. It's very easy. It's not complex. But when we start to apply in the practical sessions, you will understand more. So in the next class, we will start to talk about the increment, which is the last aspect of the Scrum artifacts. And then we go into other artifacts like the metrics. Metrics will just be very easy, quick one, and that will be it.
So during the practicals, we'll be juggling from Jira to this, to some of these theories, so to tie it together.
Everything will be on Jira, facilitating a sprint planning. That is, everybody will go now to create their Jira account. I will send out the YouTube video, how to create it, you watch it, create it by yourself, how to create user stories, and so on. Then our first session will be, our first scenario will be, you are a new Scrum Master. How will you help your team set up for success? Then what are some of the things you need to do? I will set the first 30 days or first 90 days as a Scrum Master. Those are the crux of the matter, preparing you hardcore for interview and for work immediately after you knowing the concept. Because when you get on the job, if it is a new team, what do you need to know? How do you need to understand? What do you need? You need to understand the people. You need to understand the product. You need to understand the tools. Right? So how do you go about that? I'll give you all the steps and we go now practically. Because of doing that, you have to set up the workflow. How do you have a discussion with the PO to understand the product goal? And then the PO, if it is a complete new team and the team does not know the product goal yet, how do you discuss with the PO to set up and facilitate the product vision or product goal meeting? Now the product goal is known. How do you prepare the team to set up the workflow? This is no longer Scrum Guide anymore. It is work. And that is why the second part is now interesting. I explain all of this, then you have a task to go prepare, and then you come and facilitate that meeting. So that's why this training, when you really go through it in this robust way, more than when I'm giving you 3 years experience, you deserve it and you can back it up. And all these things I'm teaching are practical things I do every day. So it will now be constant application. And that is where people have to go into groups. And at that time, if you're in a group and you are not pulling your weight, anybody for himself at that time, God will take care of you all. That's why it's important, and I still encourage, try to create our time to read the Scrum Guide cover to cover again. Read the Scrum Guide cover to cover again. It's important. And from the look of things, our next class, I think our next class is Saturday, right? Yeah. Where are you guys located in Denmark? Are you guys anywhere near Zondabo?
Yes, dear. We are down south.
It's 2 hours from, it's an hour, 30 minutes from Sonabo.
Yeah, we'll be in Zondabo on Thursday and Friday. But
okay,
leaving Friday afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will see how it goes. So, yeah. So let me stop recording.
So I have a question. I will have something to say. I'm interested in gaming, right? Gaming, like I love games, play games. And I know there would also have to be a Scrum master in